Hi guys, today we're going to look at chapter 4, which is called A Warning from God. This is from I Am Malala. One autumn day, when I was still in primary school, our desks started to tremble and shake. "Earthquake!" we yelled. We ran outside, some of us falling as we crowded through the narrow door and gathered around our teachers for safety and comfort, like chicks around a mother hen. A few of the girls were crying. We lived in a region where earthquakes happened often, but this felt different. Even after we returned to class, the buildings continued to shake. The rumbling didn't stop. Miss Ulfat, my all-time favorite teacher, told us to stay calm. She assured us that it would be over soon. But when another strong earthquake hit within a few minutes of the first, the students were sent home. When I arrived home, I found my mother sitting in the courtyard, where she felt safest because there was no roof above her. She was reciting verses from the Holy Quran as tears streamed down her face. The aftershocks kept coming and continued past nightfall, and every time they did, my mother ran outside and insisted we go with her. My father told her not to upset the children, but we were already upset because the ground was shaking. That earthquake of 8 October 2005 turned out to be one of the worst in history. It was a 7.6 on the Richter scale and was felt as far away as Kubal and Delhi. Aftershocks continued for at least a month. Our city of Mignora was largely spared, but the northern areas of Pakistan, including our beloved Shangla, were devastated. When we finally heard from our family and friends there, they said that they had thought it would be the end of the world. They described the roar of rocks sliding down the hills and everyone running out of their houses, reciting the Holy Quran, the screams as roofs crashed down, and the howls of buffalo and goats. They were terrified. And then, when the destruction stopped, they waited for help. The government was slow to arrive, but help came immediately from the rescue workers from a conservative religious group called, I think you know I'm not going to try to pronounce that. I'm just going to say TNSM, or the Movement for the Enforcement of Islamic Law, led by Sufi Muhammad and his son-in-law, Maulana Fazlullah. Don't quote me on that. Eventually, the government tried to help, and aid from the Americans who had troops and helicopters in nearby Afghanistan made it in. But most of the volunteers and medical help came from the organizations that were linked with militant groups like the TNSM. They helped clear and rebuild destroyed villages. They led prayers and buried bodies. They took in many of the 11,000 orphaned children. In our culture, orphans are usually adopted by the extended family. But the earthquake had been so bad that entire families had been wiped out or lost everything and were in no position to care for an additional children. Many of the orphans went to live in a fundamentalist madrasas. Mullahs from the TNSM preached that the earthquake was a warning from God. If we did not mend our ways and introduce Sharia or Islamic law, more severe punishment would come. The whole country was in shock. For a long time after the earthquake, we were vulnerable, which made it that much easier for someone with bad intentions to use the nation's fear for his gain. Chapter 5, The First Direct Threat. Chapter 5, The First Direct Threat. Each morning, as my friends passed through the gate to school, a man across the street stood scowling at us. Then one night, he arrived at our home along with 6 elders from the community. I answered the door. He claimed to be a mufti, or an Islamic scholar, and said that he had a problem with the school. My father shooed me into the other room as this mufti and the elders crowded into our little house, but I heard every word. "I am representing good Muslims," the mufti said. "And we all think your girls' high school is a blasphemy. You should close it. Teenage girls should not be going to school. They should be in purdah." This mufti was clearly under the influence of a Maulana who had been running an illegal radio broadcast, through which he had gave sermons and rallied people whom he deemed un-Islamic. What we knew, but the mufti did not, was that his own niece attended my father's school in secret. As my father debated with this mufti, one of the elders spoke up. "I'd heard you were not a pious man," the man said to my father. "But there are Qurans here in your home." "Of course there are," my father said. "I am Muslim." The mufti jumped back into the conversation, complaining about the girls entering the school through the same gate that men used, so my father came up with a compromise. The older girls would enter through a different gate. Eventually, the mufti backed down and the men left. But even as the door shut behind them, I had a knot in my stomach. I had grown up watching stubborn, prideful Pashtun men. Generally, when a Pashtun man loses an argument, he never really forgets or forgives. Even though I was a child, I knew this man was mistaken. I had studied the Quran, our holy book, since I was 5, and my parents sent me to madrasa for religious studies in the afternoons when school finished. It was an open-air mosque where boys and girls studied the Holy Quran together. I loved learning the Arabic alphabet. I loved the strange and mysterious shapes of the letters, the sounds of the prayers as we recited them all together, and the stories about how to live a life according to the teachings of Allah. My teacher there was a woman. She was kind and wise. For me, the madrasa was a place for religious education only. I would go to the Kushal school for all my other studies. But for many of these children, the madrasa was the only place they would ever study. They wouldn't take any other classes, no science, no math, no literature. They would study only Arabic so that they could recite the Holy Quran. They didn't learn what the words actually meant, though, only how to say them. I didn't think much of this difference until later, after the mufti's visit to our house. One day, I was playing with the neighborhood children in an alley, and when we were choosing up sides for a game of cricket, one of the boys said he didn't want me on his team. "Our school is better than yours," he said, as if that explained things. I didn't agree one bit. "My school is the better one," I said. "Your school is bad," he insisted. "It is not on the straight path of Islam." I didn't know what to make of this, but I knew he was wrong. My school was a heaven. Because inside the Kushal school, we flew on wings of knowledge. In a country where women aren't allowed out in public without a man, we girls traveled far and wide inside the pages of our books. In a land where many women can't read the prices in the markets, we did multiplication. In a place where, as soon as we were teenagers, we'd have to cover our heads and hide ourselves from the boys who'd been our childhood playmates, we ran free as the wind. We didn't know where our education would take us. All we wanted was a chance to learn in peace, and that is what we did. The crazy world could carry on outside of the walls of the Kushal school. Inside, we could be who we were. Our only concerns, once we dropped our school bags in the classroom, were the same as any child's at school. Who would get the highest grade on today's test? Who would sit with whom at recess? It was a point of pride for me that almost every year in primary school, I won the trophy for first place at the end of the term. I was considered one of the top girls and the principal's daughter. And some of the girls thought maybe there was a connection between the two. But it was a point of pride for my father that he gave me no special treatment. And the proof was obvious to everyone when a new girl came to school when I was about 9. Her name was Malka-i-Noor. She was a bright and determined girl, but I did not think she was nearly as clever as me. So on the last day of school that year, when awards were announced, I was stunned. She had gotten first place, and I was second. I smiled politely as she received her trophy, but the minute I got home, I burst into tears. When my father saw me, he comforted me, but not in the way I wanted. "It's a good thing to come second," he said, "because you learn that if you can win, you can lose, and you should learn to be a good loser, and not just a good winner." I was too young and too stubborn to appreciate his words, and truth be told, I still prefer to be first. But after that term, I worked extra hard so I would never have to learn that particular lesson again. Another one of my regular worries was whether Moniba was angry with me. She was my best friend, bookish like me, almost like my twin. We sat together whenever we could on the bus at recess in the classroom, and she made me laugh as no one else could. But we had a habit of fighting, and always over the same thing, when another girl came between us. "Are you my friend or hers?" Moniba would say if I sat with another girl at recess. "Moniba," I'd say, "you were the one ignoring me." The worst part was when Moniba would refuse to talk to me. Then I would get angry at her for being angry at me. Sometimes these spats would last for days. Eventually I would miss her too much and I would take responsibility for the fight. I always seemed to take the blame. And then she would make a funny face and we'd all fall apart laughing and forget our differences. Until the next time another girl came between us. How could a place where I learned so much and laughed so much be bad?